As I stood at my own wedding reception, my bridal veil was violently ripped backward, and a searing pain shot through my scalp as my father's fist clenched my hair. Before I could even scream, he gave a brutal downward jerk, smashing my face straight into the cold marble floor of the Columbus banquet hall. Blood began to splatter across my pristine white gown, while my mother and brother stood in the background with twisted, satisfied smiles on their faces. They thought this public humiliation would break me into giving them what they wanted. But they had no idea that my broken nose was the exact catalyst that would send them all to federal prison. Before I tell you how my own family destroyed my wedding, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. It always means a lot to me to see how many people from around the world are joining my journey and standing by my side. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I can't wait to hear from you. Hi, my name is Belle. For the last 4 years, I've worked brutal 12-hour shifts as a trauma nurse at a major hospital in Columbus, Ohio. Every day, I watched people arrive broken by accidents, violence, and tragedy, and it was my job to stay calm and help put them back together. I've always been a giver, someone who put others first. But while I spent years healing strangers, I was completely blind to the people slowly draining me under my own roof. Growing up, I was taught one rule above all else: blood is thicker than water. My parents made sure I believed family always came first, no matter the cost. If family needed help, you gave it. If family was struggling, you carried them. I wore that loyalty like a badge of honor. What I didn't realize was that my family didn't see my loyalty as love. They saw it as something they could exploit. Then I met Preston Vance. Preston was a successful real estate developer, but what drew me to him wasn't his money, it was his kindness. For the first time in my life, someone was taking care of me instead of asking me for something. He listened after my exhausting shifts, supported me, and loved me for who I was. When he proposed on a snowy evening overlooking the Columbus skyline, I truly believed I had found my safe place. But while I saw the man I wanted to spend my life with, my family saw something else. They saw a walking ATM. My father, Garrick, ruled our family with guilt and manipulation. My mother, Maeve, supported every lie he told. And then there was my younger brother, Callum, the golden child. Despite being deeply involved in underground sports gambling and constantly drowning in debt, he could do no wrong in their eyes. Whenever he got into trouble, they found someone else to pay the price. Usually, that someone was me. 6 months after my engagement, the trap was set. One rainy Tuesday night, after a brutal 14-hour ER shift, my phone rang. My father was crying. In all my years, I had never heard Garrett cry before. He claimed they were months behind on their mortgage and that the bank had sent a final foreclosure notice. According to him, they would lose their home within weeks. My mother got on the phone sobbing. "Please, Belle, we have nowhere to go. Blood is thicker than water." I was terrified for them. The next morning, I sat down with Preston and explained everything. I hated asking him for money, but before I could finish, he reached for his checkbook and wrote a check for $15,000. "Your family is my family now," he told me. "If they're hurting, we fix it." I was overwhelmed by his generosity. I drove straight to my parents' house and handed the check to my father. Garrick wiped away his tears, thanked me, and promised the money would save their home. A week later, I stopped by unexpectedly with groceries. Using my spare key, I let myself in and heard voices coming from the living room. I froze. My father was laughing. "I told you she'd get the cash from him."
Garrick said, "That real estate boy is soft. Now make sure you pay off Marcus before he sends his guys back here." Marcus was Callum's sports bookie. The mortgage story had been a complete lie. The $15,000 Preston had worked hard to earn never went towards saving their house. It went straight to paying off my brother's gambling debt. The grocery bag slipped from my hands as the truth hit me. My parents didn't see me as their daughter. I was simply a bridge to Preston's bank account. You would think getting caught in a lie that big would make them feel ashamed. It didn't. People like my father don't feel shame. They only become angry when their schemes stop working. Instead of confronting them, I quietly pulled away. I focused on my wedding plans, my hospital shifts, and building a future with Preston. I promised myself I would never ask him for another dollar. But my family wasn't finished. They had discovered that Preston's love for me was the perfect weapon. And 4 months after the mortgage scam, they launched a lie so dark and so cruel that it still makes my blood run cold. It was a Thursday afternoon when my mother Maeve called me at the hospital. She wasn't just crying this time. She was hyperventilating, screaming into the receiver. She told me that Garrick had collapsed at home and had been rushed to a specialized private clinic just outside the city. She claimed the doctors had discovered a severe, life-threatening cardiac condition, a massive blockage that required an immediate, uninsured, specialized surgery. "The clinic won't schedule the operating room without a deposit, Belle," she wailed, her voice echoing through the sterile hospital hallway where I stood. "They need $25,000 wire transferred today, or your father won't make it to the weekend. They are letting him die because we are poor." As a trauma nurse, my medical training should have kicked in. I should have asked for the name of the cardiologist, the specific diagnosis, or the hospital transfer codes. But fear is a powerful paralyzer. Garrick was my father, and the thought of him dying before he could walk me down the aisle completely shattered my judgment. I left my shift early, tears streaming down my face, and called Preston from my car. I was practically hysterical. I told him my father was dying and that we needed $25,000 right now. Again, Preston didn't hesitate. He was in the middle of a major business meeting, but he walked out, called his bank, and wire transferred $25,000 directly into my father's personal checking account within 20 minutes. "Don't worry about the money, Belle," he texted me right after. "Just get to your dad. I'm right behind you." I drove like a maniac to the clinic my mother had named, but when I arrived, the reception desk had no record of a Garrick being admitted. Frantic, I called my mother, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I drove to my parents' house, my heart in my throat, expecting to find an empty home or a medical emergency. Instead, I saw my father's car parked in the driveway. I unlocked the front door and walked into the living room, my breath catching in my throat. There was no medical equipment. There were no doctors. Garrick was sitting on the couch drinking a beer, watching a football game, and looking healthier than he ever had in his life. Maeve was sitting next to him, counting a stack of cash. When they saw me standing there, pale and trembling, my mother didn't even flinch. She just sighed and said, "Oh, look, the nurse is here." I looked at my father, my voice shaking as I asked, "Where is the surgery? Where are the doctors?" Garrick took a slow sip of his beer and looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "Callum went out to Las Vegas last weekend and got in deep with some very bad people. Belle, he owed 40 grand. We used the 15 from before, but they were threatening to break his legs if we didn't get the rest by tonight. I did what I had to do to save my son." I stood there feeling the room spin around me. My father had faked a fatal heart disease. My mother had weaponized my own medical background against me. They had stolen an additional $25,000 from the man who was doing nothing but trying to love me. All to fund my brother's reckless, illegal lifestyle in Nevada. I realized then that they didn't just love Callum more. They completely despised me for being successful and independent. The betrayal settled deep into my bones, heavy and freezing cold. I didn't scream. I didn't yell. I just turned around and walked out of that house, knowing that the people who gave me life were nothing more than common thieves. The day of my wedding finally arrived. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, a beautiful June afternoon in Columbus, Ohio.
Preston had spared no expense, booking a breathtaking, luxurious banquet hall with soaring ceilings and marble floors. He wanted me to feel like royalty, to completely forget the trauma and anxiety my family had inflicted on us. I wore a stunning, pure white lace gown, and as I walked down the aisle and looked into Preston's eyes, I promised myself that I would block out the toxicity of my relatives who sat prominently in the front rows. I had strictly forbidden Preston from giving them another dime, and I thought that by keeping them at a distance, we were safe. We finished our ceremony, took our vows, and transitioned into the grand reception. The air was filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Right after our first dance, as the guests were drifting toward the buffet, my mother, Maeve, caught my arm. Her grip was surprisingly tight. "Belle, honey, come to the back bridal preparation room for a second," she whispered, her voice dripping with a fake, sickening sweetness.
Your father and Callum want to give you a private wedding blessing before the speeches start. Foolishly, because it was my wedding day, and a tiny, naive part of my heart still starved for their approval. I followed her down the long hallway and stepped into the private room behind the main stage. The moment the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me, the atmosphere shifted from celebration to ambush. Garrick was standing near the vanity mirror, a thick printed document in his hand, while Callum leaned against the wall, a smug, entitled grin plastered across his face. There was no wedding blessing. My father didn't even look at my dress or tell me I looked beautiful. He walked straight up to me and thrust the papers into my hands. I looked down, my heart sinking. It was a formal dealership purchase agreement for a brand new top-of-the-line Cadillac Escalade 5 Series, a luxury SUV worth nearly $15,000. You're going to go back out there to that wealthy husband of yours right now, Belle, Garrick said, his voice dropping into that familiar, commanding tone that used to make me tremble as a child. The dealership in Dublin is holding the vehicle for me until tomorrow morning. They just need a cash down payment of exactly $3,000 to finalize the financing and let me drive it off the lot. Go tell Preston to write the check. Consider it his final wedding gift to your family. I stared at the paperwork, then looked up at my father, then at my brother, and finally at my mother. I felt a wave of absolute disgust wash over me. "Are you insane?" I whispered, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You want me to ask Preston for $3,000 for a luxury car after you stole $15,000 for Callum's bookie, after you faked a fatal heart condition to scam $25,000 more out of him? He has already given you $4,000 of his hard-earned money. I am not asking him for a single cent more. This ends today." Callum sneered from the corner, crossing his arms. "Oh, look at the big shot nurse pretending she's too good for us now that she scored a rich guy. You owe us, Belle. You wouldn't even be here if it weren't for Mom and Dad." Maeve stepped closer, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Don't be an ungrateful, selfish brat, Belle. Your brother has a major debt deadline on Monday, and your father needs this car to show Preston's high society friends that we aren't garbage. Blood is thicker than water. Go get the check, or I swear to God, we will make a scene out there that will ruin your precious reputation forever." I looked at the three people who were supposed to love and protect me, and for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely no fear. I felt only a cold, burning contempt. I ripped the dealership contract in half, threw the pieces directly into my father's face, and snarled, "Get out of my sight, all of you. The bank is closed. I am done being your victim." I didn't wait for their response. I turned my back on them, grabbed the heavy satin layers of my wedding gown, and lunged for the door. I needed to get back to the safety of the reception, back to Preston, back to the light. I threw the heavy wooden door open and burst out into the long hallway that connected the bridal suite to the main banquet hall. I could hear the distant, joyful music playing, the chatter of 200 guests who had no idea of the nightmare unfolding just a few yards away. I began to run, but before I could take more than 3 steps,
I heard the heavy, furious thud of my father's dress shoes sprinting behind me. "You selfish little bitch," Garrick roared. Before I could turn around, his large, calloused hand flew forward. He didn't just grab me. He lunged into my bridal veil, his fingers wrapping into a tight, brutal knot at the very roots of my hair. The force of his grip violently ripped my head backward. A white, hot, blinding flash of pain shot straight through my scalp. As my neck snapped back, I let out a sharp, piercing shriek of absolute agony, my hands flying up to try and loosen his grip. But he was too strong, driven by pure narcissistic fury. He didn't care that I was his daughter. He didn't care that this was my wedding day. In his mind, I had humiliated him by saying no, and he was going to reassert his control by force. With a savage downward grunt, Garrick channeled all his weight and threw his arm forward, giving my hair a brutal, crushing downward jerk. I completely lost my footing. The floor rushed up to meet me in a blur of white lace and polished wood. The impact was cataclysmic. My face slammed directly into the cold, solid marble floor of the Columbus banquet hall. A sickening wet crack echoed in my ears as my nasal bone fractured under the immense pressure. For a second, the entire world went pitch black. A brilliant explosion of pain erupted behind my eyes, so intense that it stole the air right out of my lungs. When I rolled over, gasping for breath, I looked down to see a thick, dark, crimson fountain of blood pouring from my nose, instantly splattering across the pristine white lace of my wedding dress. Through the tears and the haze of a severe concussion, I looked up. My father was standing over me, his chest heaving, his face contorted in an ugly, self-righteous scowl. But what broke my heart permanently was what stood right behind him. My mother Maeve and my brother Callum had walked out of the room. They weren't horrified. They weren't rushing to help me. Callum had a disgusting, satisfied smirk on his face, nodding in approval, while Maeve crossed her arms, whispering, "Maybe now you'll learn some respect and remember who your real family is." They were glad. They enjoyed seeing me broken on the floor. Then the heavy double doors at the end of the hall swung open. Preston had heard my scream. I will never forget the look on my husband's face when he saw me. He took in the sight of his new wife bleeding out on the marble and my family standing over me like a pack of wolves. A terrifying primal roar tore out of Preston's throat. He charged down that hallway like a freight train, his face white with pure, unadulterated rage. Garrick actually took a step back, his eyes widening in sudden cowardly fear as he realized he was no longer dealing with a defenseless girl. Preston didn't even use words. He shoved my father against the wall with such force that a framed painting shattered against the drywall, and he immediately threw himself on the floor beside me, pulling my shaking, bloody body into his arms. "Biel! Oh my God! Belle! Look at me!" Preston cried, his hands trembling as he tried to stem the flow of blood with his tuxedo jacket. The entire banquet hall erupted into chaos. Guests poured into the hallway, gasping and screaming at the horrific sight, laying there in Preston's arms, feeling the warm blood soak through my dress. Something inside me completely shifted. The naive, forgiving trauma nurse who always tried to heal her family died on that marble floor. In her place, a freezing, calculated determination took over. I looked past Preston's shoulder at my mother and brother, who were now trying to shrink into the crowd, realizing the gravity of what they had allowed. I wiped a streak of blood from my eyes, looked straight at my husband, and whispered through the agonizing pain, "Call 911. Don't let them leave. I want them destroyed." Within 7 minutes, the deafening wail of sirens pierced through the night air outside the Columbus banquet hall. The double doors burst open again, and a team of paramedics from the Columbus Division of Fire rushed down the hallway, carrying a trauma stretcher and medical kits. As a trauma nurse, I knew exactly what they were doing before they even touched me. I knew the protocol for a displaced nasal fracture. I knew the signs of a concussive shock. But being the patient lying there helplessly, As they secured a cervical collar around my neck and gently wiped the dark clotted blood from my lips was a surreal nightmare. My pristine white lace dress was heavily ruined, stained a deep, horrific crimson from my chest down to my waist. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, I looked over Preston's shoulder. The Columbus police officers had already arrived, their blue and red lights flashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the venue. They had immediately locked down the exit doors, turning my dream wedding reception into an active, taped-off crime scene. Garrick was loudly protesting near the coat rack, his face pale, but his voice still dripping with that arrogant entitlement. "It was a private family matter. She tripped and fell. You have no right to touch me," he yelled at the officers. But Preston was already handling it with a terrifying, quiet efficiency. He stood like a stone wall between my family and the paramedics, his tuxedo jacket completely soaked in my blood. He pointed directly at Garrick, Maeve, and Callum. "He attacked my wife," Preston told the lead officer, his voice vibrating with a deadly cold rage. "And those two helped him do it. They locked her in a room and they blocked the guests from helping. I want them arrested right now." The police didn't just take Preston's word for it. They moved through the crowd of 200 shocked guests, collecting eyewitness statements from the people who had seen Garrick violently yank my hair and smash my face into the floor. More importantly, Preston went straight to our wedding photographer and the venue's security manager. Within 20 minutes, the police had seized the raw high-definition memory cards from the photographer's camera and a copy of the banquet hall's digital surveillance footage. The evidence was absolute. The camera didn't lie. It perfectly captured the exact second Garrick's fist clenched my hair, the brutal downward arc of his arm, and the chilling, satisfied smirks on Maeve and Callum's faces as I struck the marble. I was rushed under emergency lights to the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, the very hospital system where I had spent years helping others. My colleagues in the emergency department gasped when they wheeled me in. The CT scans confirmed a severely fractured, displaced nasal bone and a grade 2 concussion. While the doctors prepared me for an emergency closed reduction surgery to reset my nose, I refused to let them clean me up until the forensic photographer had documented every single injury. I wanted every laceration, every dark purple bruise forming around my eyes, and every torn strand of hair from my scalp captured in high-resolution detail. I was building an airtight cage for my predators. The next morning, while I was recovering in my hospital bed with heavy bandaging across my face, Preston sat beside me with our civil attorney and a forensic accountant. We weren't just going after Garrett criminally. We were going to completely dismantle their entire existence. I opened up my personal banking apps and handed our attorney every text message, email, and bank statement from the past year. We compiled the undeniable paper trail of the first $15,000 extortion for Callum's bookie, followed by the explicit fraud of the second $25,000 wire transfer, where Garrick had forged medical clinic invoices to fake a fatal heart condition. By the time the sun went down that Friday, we had filed a massive civil lawsuit for grand larceny, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, while the state prosecutor upgraded Garrick's charges to a high felony assault. The trap was set, and my family was walking straight into it. 6 months later, I stood in a crowded Ohio courtroom looking toward the defense table. My nose had healed perfectly thanks to a brilliant plastic surgeon, and I stood tall and proud, my hand locked tightly in Preston's. I was no longer the weak, guilt-ridden daughter they could intimidate. I was a survivor, and I was there to watch the hammer of justice fall. Garrick sat in a bright orange jail jumpsuit, his wrists cuffed to a chain around his waist. The arrogance was completely gone from his face. He looked like a broken, terrified old man. Next to him sat Maeve and Callum, their heads bowed as the state prosecutor played the high-definition wedding footage on the projector screen for the entire courtroom to see. The judge didn't show a single ounce of mercy. Because of the sheer brutality of the attack, the permanent physical harm to my nasal bone, and the overwhelming evidence of premeditated financial abuse, Garrick was convicted of second-degree felony assault. The judge looked directly at him and said, "A father is meant to protect his daughter, not act as her primary abuser." He sentenced my father to 5 years of hard time in an Ohio state prison. Maeve and Callum were convicted as accessories after the fact and for fraud. They were slapped with massive criminal fines and placed on 2 years of strict supervised criminal probation, meaning one wrong move would land them in a cell right next to Garrick. But their criminal sentences were only half of the karma that awaited them. Our civil lawsuit hit them like a financial tidal wave. The court ruled entirely in our favor, ordering Garrick and Callum to pay back the stolen $4,000, along with an additional $6,000 for my medical bills, surgery, and punitive damages for the intentional destruction of my wedding. To enforce the judgment, a legal lien was placed on my parents' suburban home. Since they didn't have a single dime in savings, the county sheriff put the house up for foreclosure auction. Watching that house sell was the most liberating moment of my life. My mother, Maeve, was forced to pack her things into cardboard boxes and move into a tiny, run-down studio apartment on the bad side of town. Surviving entirely on a minimum-wage grocery store job, Callum's underground bookies quickly realized that the family no longer had an asset to borrow against or a wealthy son-in-law to scam. With no home to hide in, Callum had to flee the state of Ohio entirely to escape the dangerous people collection agencies had put on his trail. The family empire of greed and manipulation had completely collapsed into ashes. Preston and I didn't let their darkness ruin our future. A few weeks after the trial ended, we walked into a quiet, beautiful local courthouse with a few of our closest friends and a brilliant photographer. I wore a simple, elegant white dress, one that stayed completely clean. We exchanged our vows in peace, surrounded by nothing but genuine love and respect. Sometimes I look at the faint, tiny scar near the bridge of my nose in the mirror. It doesn't make me sad anymore. It's a badge of honor. My family tried to paint my wedding dress in my own blood to force me into submission, but in the end, they only succeeded in painting their own futures in prison gray. I am finally free. If you want to see more stories of absolute justice and calculated karma, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a confession.